I have been forced to reflect on a very important but very little known facet of our own recent history. And I am very grateful to these two young scholars who've done a yeoman service in analyzing the works of Romila, Thapar, and Witzel. And this has, they deserve a big hand. They deserve a big hand, both of them. And you know, we did not transition from a colonial state to an independent state directly. There was an intergenum of dominion status. All right? The simple fact of history, and I'd like to go a little into a little known aspect of our history. You got free in 1947 only and only because the INA and Subhash Bose had completely subverted the loyalties of 25 lakh British Indian Army. Period. And if you want to substantiate that, just take a look at the transfer of power archives. How the history of the independence struggle could have been written without reference to the transfer of power archives is something that amazes me. But it has been done. You know, so the truth is that INA and Netaji got you freedom, but power was handed over to an Anglophile elite led by Nehru. And he appoints the first Governor General, Lord Louis Mountbatten. After 200 years, you gain independence. I thought we would be very keen to boot the British out. Get the hell away from us. Leave us in peace. But no, we had Lord Louis Mountbatten anointed as the first Governor General. And as I keep saying, Pakistan had the decency to appoint Jinnah as their first Governor General, right? Now, from this Anglophile orientation of the successor colonial regime, we can today discern the outlines of a kind of a succession plot designed to see that the narratives and the histories and the concepts, which had been propagated by the Raj continued. And to perpetuate these narratives, we had a set of intellectual coolies. We had a set of so-called leftist liberal historians whose bounden mission was to see that not one word of the narratives propounded by the Raj were changed by any, now I don't want to get abusive, but any brown ass people later, right? Were not changed. And ladies and gentlemen, one of the doyens of this brigade of leftist liberal historians is Romila Thapar. Let me give you an inkling of her importance. When I attended the National Defence College course in New Delhi as a brigadier, that is the highest seat of learning in the armed forces. One of the premier lectures used to be by Romila Thapar on the issue of caste. It was her duty to inculcate into the Indian senior military and a lot of police officers, intelligence officers, DRDO, many other allied organizations come there and attend that 1 year long course. To sort of mold their minds into a narrative. In the fashioning of a so-called secular state in India, there was a design. And behind one of the architect queens of this design is this Romila Thapar lady, right? And two anchor premises that she took from the British era or the colonial dispensation was one, that there was never ever a state called India. It was a gift of the British Empire. They united you. They got you together. And, there is that imperial justice theory which the British used to justify their rule in India. What was this imperial justice theory? The imperial justice theory said the Indians are such a fractious, squabbling, fighting lot amongst themselves, a cauldron of races, castes, creeds, languages, ethnicities, that they can never, rule themselves. They can never operate freely. Any Indian who's selected will never be able to rise above his caste loyalties, sub identities, to be able to have a pan India view, and therefore India needs foreign rule if there is to be the rule of law and justice. And the Mughals gave it to us first, and then the British came onto the scene to gift us, nationhood, etc. This kind of arrant nonsense. And then she went on, one of the prime, and I think it is a very nefarious role. I'm sorry. It is an extremely nefarious role to construct a so-called secular state in India. One of the primary planks was in a democratic dispensation, 80% of the country are Hindus. If you splinter them into a multiplicity of castes and creeds, then they lose their demographic relevance. They can never elect a government, which is, let us say, pro-Hindu in ethos. They will never be able to do that. And this is actually what was done. The British use caste as the primary fault line. Risley is the architect of the caste fault lines in India. Because after 1857, the British were shaken. How could this disparate country of these competing cauldron of castes, creeds, races, etc. come together to, launch a nationwide revolt against us? So they said, we'll see that it never happens again. So identify every fault line in the Indian body politic and make sure that you widen those cleavages. Right? And we have that taunt by Churchill. To talk of India as the basis of a nation state is as ridiculous as saying that the equator can be the basis of a nation state. The Madrasi, the Punjabi, the Tamil, the Maratha, the Assamese, what have they in common with one another? Nothing. We united them. You see, these are the narratives that a set of Indian intellectual coolies, as I think Rajiv very rightly calls them, I mean, it is disgraceful. And this breed was specifically created by the British, by Macaulay. Let me read out to you, what this did to us. He says, this British system of education, they severed the Indian educated classes from their cultural roots and reducing them to little more than mindless mimics of Western fashions and mores. There was a want of pride and want of faith in their own traditional culture and as the part of the upper classes of India. This sense of constitutional inferiority that seemed to have possessed the Indian. This is Benfield Havel, a Britisher writing on what he saw of the Indian intellectuals that had been created in the colonial period. So Romila, Thapar et al. Are all inheritors of that Macaulay tradition which created clerks for the empire. Clerks for the empire. Mental coolies for the empire. And one of their tasks was to see that none of the British narratives were changed. So the concept of imperial justice was incorporated into the Indian constitution by calling it social justice. More than liberty, fraternity, equality. In a democratic constitution, our preamble begins with to give to ourselves justice, social. It is an echo hangover of imperial justice. Right? This was the job of Romila Thapar, which she did to excellence. She propounded the theory that there was no nation called India. There was never ever a nation called India. And I would like to remind her that every time any Hindu family sits down for any ritual, you start with an invocation of, of Jambu Dvipe, Bharat Khande. It is ages old, this affirmation. And she says, well, there was no nation state called India. There is no religion called Hinduism. Please, that is the next part of it. Because a secular state of the kind that they desired, you know, our view of secularism is that sarva dharma samabhava. All religions are equal. We give no preference to any particular religion. There is no state religion in India. But here was that for India to be secular, Hinduism has to be destroyed as a religion. We have to come to the first, anchor premise that there was no country called India. Thanks to the British. Loyalty to the Raj has continued for 75 years after independence because of a series of intellectual coolies like Romila Thapar. Now, this lady has magisterial, airs. We were conducting a seminar in the Vivekananda International Foundation. That whole seminar was conceived and led by the late Dr. B.B. Lal, the doyen of Indian archaeology. And he said, issue invitations to these people. So we told him, sir, inko kyun bula rahi hai? He said, no. Issue invitations. We want them to come and discuss and debate. They refused. It is beneath our dignity to discuss with right-wing, hawks or this or that or whatever you would like to call it. The same thing, Rajiv Malhotra ji challenged her to a debate. Let's come and discuss. That is the academic methodology. Peer review. What you are writing must be peer reviewed by your fellow travelers in the academic field. But you refuse to discuss. You refuse to debate. You claim to be Democrats when you refuse the right to dissent. In this particular seminar, once again, they have all been invited. And you can ask Rajiv ji as to what kind of responses we have got, where we have got them. So what kind of a Democrat are you? What kind of an academic are you if you are not prepared to discuss and debate your findings, your conclusions? That is the academic method. But she has trenchantly refused to do this. Another thing that she has tried to do as part of this secular entity creation project is very important. The trying to create a secular nation, in the mold of the European nations. And the European nation, the American president swears on God, holds the Bible in his hand. And so is it for all the European nations, more or less. But in India, they wanted a kind of an anti-religion, anti-majority religion, by the way. One particular religion to be singled out, ये तो धर्म ही नहीं है. There is no Hindu faith. There are so many of these, sub-sects and this and that. There is no Hinduism, there is no India. And you are one of the prime doyen of historians in India. There is no India, you are a doyen of the historians of India. And one of the things that she, really pioneered, history must not call to memory the dastardly crimes and atrocities and genocides of Indians, past Islamic rulers, because such recollections give rise to unhealthy trends which militate against the secular fabric of this country. I think I have proved my case. You will not talk of the massacres. You will not talk of the destruction of temples. You will deny the destruction of temples. You will try and, cream it over. Give it a very, very positive spin. These are not historians. These are spin doctors. These are not historians. These are spin doctors who have been spin doctoring the British narratives and trying to present them as the infallible truth. Long after the Raj is gone, the intellectual coolies of the Raj have stayed behind. The Macaulay brand of clerks have stayed behind. And Sushri Romila Thapar has impeccable credentials. Her grandfather presented a Saropa to General Dyer of Jallianwala fame. I rest my case. You see, the whole family rose because of their loyalty to the Raj. And we can see this loyalty continuing. We can see this loyalty continuing. And though she writes in her magnum opus on the history of India, that we must be open to new interpretations. And any new interpretation is Hindu right, is revanchist, is kind of anti-secular. The way she bristles that any other interpretation than what the British gave is what it is. And it was her prime duty to try and preserve the narratives of the Raj. The second part of this very same series is Michael Witzel, and the two of them have collaborated. Romila Thapar is a doyen of ancient Indian history. Any gentleman, any good friend of mine who has passed the IAS, IPS exam has had to read Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, R.S. Sharma. You see? And therefore, a number of my bureaucrat friends today, when we talk to them, as to look, why don't we base our history on empirical facts? We are not talking of the saffronization of history, sir. We are saying kindly base it on empirical fact, logic, and so much evidence that has piled up in various scientific fields like radiocarbon dating. Max Muller said the Vedas were written in 1200 BCE. Period. It's an edict, it is a fatwa, you dare not change. And the trenchant way in which the leftist liberal historians have held on to this fatwa is amazing. And I will just tell you that Birhana on the Saraswati banks has been carbon dated to 8500 BP in the upper layers, 9500 years ago in the lower layers. Which is more scientific? Which is more accurate? Max Muller fatwa, back of the envelope calculation, or this one? But yet, Romila Thapar and her ilk have held on to Max Muller. And they said, dare you deviate? So, one of the key historical debates in this country is about the strategic direction of the so-called Indo-Aryan migration / invasion, right? And Wetzel is one of the prime votaries of the Aryan invasion theory. Prime votaries of the Aryan invasion theory, which was suggested, of course, by Maxwell, but then really souped up by Mortimer Wheeler, who accused Indra of genocide, of the slaughter of 100, Dravidian cities. Now, no historical evidence has ever been adduced for this slaughter. Show us the corpses. They haven't been able to show that. But the strategic direction debate continues. My point is, the Saraswati River, the historicity of this has been disputed by all the leftist liberal historians and the colonial historians. And Romila Thapar would have us believe it was a dirty nala called the Herexavati in Afghanistan, which came from some little pool somewhere and ended up in the dirt swamps. Ladies and gentlemen, the Landsat satellite images sent back in 1970s have first shown the trace of a mighty river from the Himalayas to the sea, 4,600 kilometers long, 6 to 8 kilometers wide, perhaps bigger than the Brahmaputra, which is the cradle of not just the Aryan civilization in India, But I would reckon that it is the Ur-Haitmat, the Indo-European homeland that the European scholars talked of, right? And the fact is, you will say, but everybody says that people came from Central Asia, Anatolia to India, because India is a more rich and productive and fertile land. Those are dry desert sands. So it makes sense, logic, a strategic east-west orientation of any mass movements, whether it is the Greeks, the Iranians, the Sakas, the Huns, the Turco-Mongols, etc., etc., etc. It's all east to west. So why should there have been an out of India migration? Yes, it could have occurred in two circumstances. One is if there was an eco catastrophe in northern India, and there was an eco catastrophe when the Saraswati dried out, desiccated, and the whole area was desertified. What is Rajasthan today was so lush and green that there used to be rhinos there and tigers there, incidentally. So lush and green it was. It became a desert. Are you trying to tell me that mass migrations or invasions will take place into an area that has been desertified? What is more likely to happen? The people who are now thirsting for water will either migrate east towards Ganga, Yamuna, Doab, or they'll migrate westwards, Afghanistan, Iran, and out. And more evidence is piling up, and Kalyan Raman, there could be nobody better than him to talk on this, that the migration is out of India. Wetzel, connived to see that Bodhayan Shrauta Sutra on the movement of Amavasu. Amavasu moved west is what the verse says. And it has been mistranslated and quoted by Romila Thapar courtesy Wetzel, because she had to cite a western source, right? That Amavasu moved east, and the second interpretation is he didn't move at all. He stayed where he was in Parshu, that is Persia, and in Gandhar, that is Afghanistan, and beyond. Whereas the actual verse says he moved west. He moved west. And Mount Ararat is perhaps named after Amavasu. And let me just give you another thing. The so-called, fixation of Wetzel with everything came from Iran. What we have come to, and we can present in my latest book, you can have a look at that, Beyond the Aryan Invasion Theory. The simple fact is that the Dasas are the Dahas of Iran. Daha means common peasant in Iran, right? And it is said that they were once together in the Aryan homeland, in the Saraswati. There was an ideological dispute about the nature of how to worship the fire. The Angiras rishis did the Havan by pouring oblations into the fire, Homa into the fire. They said anything into the fire pollutes the fire. Because of this ideological conflict, there was a physical conflict. And then the Dasharajan war, the Dwadash Rajan war, all that takes place. Dwadash is earlier. And the Iranians are pushed out into Iran with the Dwadash Rajan war. King Divodas attacks 100 fort cities in the Arjikia region, which is the lower foothills of the Himalayas, right? And the Iranians are pushed out because the Arjikia is the Soma growing area, which is the prize Homa. The Iranians can't pronounce the S, so they pronounce it as H. Soma becomes Homa. Sapta Sindhu becomes Hapta Hindu, right? So they were pushed out. And they tried to come back with the Dasharajan war when Sudas was ruling the Saraswati tract, the Middle Kingdom. A lot of similarities, echoes with China. China also had a Middle Kingdom, right? And they had 6 warring states. We've had our period of the warring states, and from here, the Iranians have been pushed out. The strategic direction is west to east. 1, because of ecological catastrophe. 2, because of wars. The Dwadash Rajan war followed by the Dasharajan war, right? So a whole lot of the crap that has been perpetuated by Romila Thapar and Michael Witzel doesn't stand scrutiny when put to the test of empirical facts, right? I would also like to point out that There is no nation called India, right? This is this is one of the greatest, disservices done to India by any citizen of India. You know, there is the key characteristics of a nation states are temporal depth and persistence over time. And if there is any one single country that has this persistence over time, from the times of the Indus Saraswati civilization down till today, it is India. Right? You have terracotta figurines of women with bindi on the center of their foreheads, vermilion in the partings of their hair. You see it today. They have bangles up to their upper arms. You see it today in Gujarat and Rajasthan especially. There are figurines in the postures of yoga. You see yoga today, right? There are figurines in the postures of meditation. There is a dead skeleton in the posture of meditation, right? So yoga and meditation are the two key pillars of, I would say, Sanatan Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma. They have been there from Birhana onwards, 8,000, 9,000 years from today, right down till the present. So you have continuity over time and you have the temporal depth.